Lisa, what is your research primarily focused on here in crop sciences?
In crop sciences, my research is focused on adapting plants to global atmospheric changes. And so this is the rise in carbon dioxide concentrations that we've been experiencing since the Industrial Revolution, and also changes in ozone concentration. And so we look at those atmospheric changes in combination with rising temperatures and increasing drought stress as well.
Okay. I didn't get the first part of that.
Oh, okay.
Your voice is soft, and so let me try that again.
Okay.
I'm gonna have to pull this up a little bit. This one. Okay, Lisa, what is your research based on the university here?
At the university, I study crop adaptation to global atmospheric changes. So these include rising carbon dioxide concentrations and also changes in ozone pollution.
We've seen a lot of that lately. How are plants not doing very well? Can crops be improved considerably as you look at those changes that need to be that are happening?
We think that there can be improvements, and so I want to be clear that crops are actually doing very well, and so yields have gone up, and this year was, I think, going to be a banner year once all of the numbers come in. But these changes are happening very quickly, and so what our research is trying to do is anticipate those changes in the future and have germplasm that is ready for those future conditions.
What are the ones that are on your priority list? Is it CO2? Is it temperature, or what?
So carbon dioxide is on the list for sure. Temperature, drought stress, and then ozone pollution is something that I've looked at quite a lot in my career, and that's something that's not really on people's radar in the same degree.
And I know it's not. You don't see much. No one talks about it. But what is the problem with ozone?
Ozone is a very reactive oxidant. And so it basically causes cells to age more quickly, and so they senesce more quickly. And so then it decreases productivity in plants. Ozone used to be a really big problem before we had catalytic converters on our cars. And so in the 50s and the 60s in places like Los Angeles or Salt Lake City, ozone concentrations were very, very high. And so in the Western world, places like the US and also in Western Europe, air pollution has actually decreased. So the peak concentrations of ozone have come down. But ozone is also a global pollutant, and so as the peak, the highest concentrations have come down, the background concentrations have crept up. So it remains a problem, and in some parts of the world, like India and China, peak ozone concentrations are still very, very high. And so it's not really something that we think about in terms of a pollutant because regulation has taken care of it.
And but it's something that's on your list, and so in case we have a problem, or for those other countries, at least you may come up with some answers for solving that.
Correct. And so it is absolutely on the list because background concentrations are still high enough to cause some damage, even in places in the United States. And in other countries, it's causing a huge amount of damage. And so the work that we're doing is trying to understand the molecular mechanisms by which plants respond to ozone, and that helps us then identify solutions.
Okay. We have some politics that they're saying the climate is not changing, but we probably need to progress with research anyway, just in case in 4 more years it starts changing again.
Well, I think the climate is absolutely changing, and I don't think that there are any politics that can dispute the fact that climate is changing. And I don't think that anyone can dispute that climate has always changed, but the rapidity at which climate is changing now, we haven't seen basically since there were dinosaurs on the planet. And so I think that this isn't a political question. It's not a political debate. The climate is absolutely changing.
And so, should farmers be concerned that within their life, their working life as they know it now, whether they're young or older, that there's going to be something that they will need to change their agronomic practices or something to make sure that they don't lose in yield?
I think so. I think so. And I think that and for a number of reasons, and not just the climate, I think that consumers are also demanding something different from agriculture today than they did, say, 30 years ago. And that is that they want to know that the products that they're buying and consuming are sustainable. And so I think farmers have a challenge in that they need to not only produce high yields, but they need to do it in a way that is sustainable. And so this is a huge challenge. And I think that there are practices that are more sustainable that farmers can enact already, and there's a lot of research that's looking at even additional further practices that can enhance the sustainability of agriculture.
And what would you suggest that they do in the short term?
In the short term, I think that farmers are already doing this because these are things that are also important for their economics. But looking at how much nitrogen they're putting down and where they're putting it down, and looking at efficiencies that can be gained by putting less inputs into the system. Farmers are also tilling less, and so looking at minimum tillage or no tillage practices that don't hurt yields but enhance soil carbon and soil health. Farmers can also and are also adopting cover crops in some states at a much higher rate than in Illinois, but they are adopting cover crops. And so there's a lot of research that still needs to be done about the potential sustainability benefits and also potential trade-offs with yield of some of these practices. But I think that there are benefits, particularly in terms of the other ecosystem benefits that agriculture then can provide, other than just yield.
Okay, and those would be?
So those would be things like soil health, like less pollution in our waterways, less pollution in our air from agriculture. Thinking about agriculture as sort of a circular system rather than just sort of a one-way street. And so I think that there's research at the University of Illinois that looks at the potential for agriculture to produce biofuels, to produce bioproducts, to sequester carbon in different ways. And, you know, as I think if we think about our landscape, which is primarily corn and soybeans today, there's also research here that's looking at envisioning a very different landscape, one that has perennial crops on it rather than just annual crops, one that has more wetlands. You said you were at a wetland just yesterday. One that has more grass pathways to soak up nutrients as they're running off into waterways. If we think about, you know, our world as a landscape rather than just an individual farm, then I think there are a lot of practices that could be changed.
Would the change in those practices result in better yields than what just typical corn breeding would be able to achieve?
So that's a really good question, and I think that if the only objective is the amount of grain that the combine is pulling off the field, then you can't really argue against the industrial agriculture that we're doing today. But if you look at the cost of that in terms of all of the environmental costs, then there is a lot to be gained by changing practices, reducing inputs, thinking about agriculture as a landscape rather than just, you know, one farm. So I think there's a lot of exciting research here that's going on, and I'm excited to be part of it.
I'm sure you are, and we're glad that you're here. I will tell farmers that they can all achieve big hardware in the National Corn Growers Yield Contest if they follow you. So. appreciate